Hey everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 772. My opponent started off with a very rare move e3. This was called the Van Kreit opening or something like that. Anyway, I responded with e5. You can see e5 and d5 are the two main moves here, and they're both good for black. So e5, and then he went d4. Oddly enough, the most common second move here for white is to play e4, just wanting to play a king's pawn defense, I guess, with the white colors. Anyway, he went d4, and it looks like we're almost entirely out of the opening book at this point. But we actually transpose after a natural move or two into something that's very common. And I was looking at this with the chess engine as well as with the opening book, and it seems the way I played was just fine. Just, if you're faced with one of these weird moves, there's nothing wrong with putting a pawn in the center, and I think d4 is fine as well. And after he pushes his d-pawn forward, really there's nothing better than taking. If you try to defend it, he can harass the piece that comes out to defend, or if you defend with the bishop, that looks awkwardly placed. If you did defend with the knight, he can push on with d5. And since that pawn is hanging, you might as well trade it off. And it's just a trade of center pawns. And then after that, d5 is the most natural move. Again, just putting a pawn in the center. And yeah, you can see it's the top choice of the database. And we've transposed back into a French defense. So this could have been, say if he had started with e4 and I played e6, and then he went d4 and I went d5, and he took and I took. That's the French defense exchange variation, leads to exactly the same position. So, and the normal moves in the French defense exchange are knight f3 or bishop to d3. But he continued with this third choice here, c4, which had a name that I can't remember, although it was displayed in the video. Anyway, knight f6 is the best response here. I was thinking maybe it wasn't so good because of the I was thinking of the how the Marshall defense against the Queen's Gambit doesn't work so well. But in this case, it's a huge difference. The e-pawns are missing. So after the exchange, say knight f6, pawn takes, knight takes, there's no other pawn that can come forward and harass the knight. So the knight is really on an excellent square there. So this is the way I should have played it. Knight f6, say he goes knight c3 to increase the pressure on the center. I can pin that guy. Let's see, he can develop with bishop d3. And I can just castle here. And it looks like a fine position for white, for black. But white is okay too here. In spite of the weird opening, white still has, we sort of transposed back into a more typical kind of position. White is still doing okay. Anyway, in the game, I played the move c6. Let's see, I guess this was still, oh no, we get out of the opening book on the next move. So after c6, he went bishop e3, which was probably a bad move. He could have just gone knight c3 and knight f6. We might have transposed into a similar line, except I've got this extra pawn move in, this c6 pawn move, which wasn't really necessary. So I wasted a bit of time there. But then he played this move, bishop e3, and at this point, it's just equal. This position, in this position, the bishop is not doing a whole lot on that square. This pawn was not even under attack, and it wasn't going to be easy for me to attack it because I have a knight here on pawn here on c6 blocking my knight. So it's not like I'm going to easily get a lot of pressure on the d-pawn. Okay, so knight f6, knight c3, bishop d6, all normal developing moves. c5, this move kicks my bishop back, but I stay on this good diagonal looking at the king side, so that didn't really accomplish a whole lot. It takes the tension out of the center, so I have a safe center, and I'm pretty free to develop. And then the next two moves, he played queen b3 and castled queenside, and after that, at this point it's probably still equal, but after queen b3, the advantage shifts to black. Actually, a funny move here. After queen b3, the chess engine is recommending knight to g4. Yeah, the queen was guarding that g4 square, but with the queen away, the knight can hop into g4 and harass the bishop on e3. Yeah, I don't usually think of moves like that, and it's kind of against the grain to play a move like that when you haven't castled or developed your queenside. So it can be a bit risky, but in this case, well, the chess engine has calculated those lines, and I guess it's all okay. Anyway, I castled, still leaving black with an edge, and he castled queenside. And you know, the combination of these moves, queen b3 and king over here, is just a big mistake, and white has a edge which is close to winning. I mean, the chess engine gives white a 1-point edge basically at this point. You know, he's castled to a place where his king is going to be exposed. I'm going to push these pawns forward and open up lines, yeah, it's just hard to see that you know, he hasn't developed his king side pieces, so he's got no attack against my king over here. Nothing happening quickly. Let's see, I started with the move rook e8. I've got to get my pieces out too, speaking of pieces, and I wanted to have a way to develop this knight over here. So I was already thinking of this kind of route, bring the knight to the king side, because I figured, well, if he castles queen side, he's probably going to try and do something with the pawns over here, or the pieces, and open things up against my king. Notice that my pawns are still far back here, so this is kind of the ideal situation when you're defending against a pawn storm, to have your pawns all on their original squares. So his attack is going to be very slow. So he played h3. Well, that keeps my knight out of g4, I guess. I go knight bd7. He goes bishop d3, getting another piece developed, and it looks like an active placement for the bishop. I go knight f8. The chess engine is already liking b6, which makes sense. Leave the knight there, and actually the knight is putting a little bit of pressure on the c5 square, so playing b6 while the knight is still there makes some sense. But, well, I reroute the knight to e6, and that also has its points too. So I'm keeping an advantage through all of this. He gets his last piece out, and I push on with b6. Yeah, I don't have any great square to develop this light squared bishop to along this diagonal, so I might as well open things up and use it on the queen side. So he took, I took back, and then he went knight d2, which, as we see, this move causes him some trouble later. And at this point, the chess engine starts to give black a winning edge. So it was, you know, half a point to 1 point advantage. Now it's 1.5 to 2 points advantage to black. And so instead of knight d2, rook h to e1. It's a good centralizing move, which he plays later, but well, we'll see why this knight on d2 is a problem. First I go bishop a6, and actually my next three moves were all top engine choices, so I played this part of the game pretty well. I'm developing my last piece, I'm getting it out. This bishop is probably his most active piece, so he doesn't want to trade it off, so I get my piece out with tempo. He drops his bishop back, and then I play knight c6 is a great central location for my knight, looking at this pawn as well as supporting the c5 push. And now he goes rook h to e1. This was kind of his last chance to do something different. Well, I don't know. He still gets in trouble after bishop f5, I think. But instead of rook h e1, bishop f5 was a recommended move. I guess that gives him the option of trading off this knight when things get dangerous here in the center. Anyway, so rook h e1 was kind of the final blow, and it's definitely a win after this. I go c5, and it's just a simple threat to take here and fork those two pieces. And if he takes, I'm taking back, and I still have that fork threat. So he tried moving the knight away from the fork, but there's actually another threat in the position, which I didn't even realize. It was, but after bishop takes b5, queen takes b5, you know, I saw that I was winning a pawn here, but what I didn't see was that this bishop is actually trapped. There's no move for the bishop. So that explains why he played the way he did in the game. And it also explains why this knight d2 move was such a terrible move. It's taking the only retreating square away from that bishop, and all the forward squares are covered by my knight. So the knight on e6, in addition to looking at these pawns over here, those squares, it's also covering those squares that the bishop might go to. So and my bishop is covering one of those squares too. But anyway, in combination, he just has no place for that bishop. So he gave up the bishop for a pawn, but after a few exchanges, let's see, I thought, you know, maybe he was trying to get something going on the e-file, but there was nothing there. Everything was properly defended. comes back with his queen to hit my knight. I trade off the bishop, and then oh, he took with the king. That's right. And then after taking, I was thinking about my move. I was probably going to play rook takes a2. Yeah, rook takes a2. That's the move I was thinking about, and that is the top engine choice. You know, he's a piece down. My pawns are all defended, even though they're a little bit scattered. His king is exposed, you know, and I have my queen coming in to squares like c6 or perhaps a4, and yeah, it's just going to be all over for the white king pretty soon. So he went ahead and resigned here. So anyway, it was kind of a funny game, but as I mentioned in the previous video, my previous attempts to record resulted in draws, and I wanted to get something on the channel that wasn't a draw, so finally I got one. Okay, so hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you all later. Bye.